You don't belong in first class dressed like that. Nicole Barrett's voice cracked across gate B12 so sharply that even the barista near the Hudson News stand stopped pouring coffee halfway through the cup. Heads turned instantly. Conversations died mid-sentence. The giant windows overlooking the runway reflected dozens of faces, now staring at one man standing calmly beside the boarding lane. Marcus Ellison didn't move. He stood there in a black hoodie, dark jeans, and worn white sneakers, holding a perfectly valid first-class boarding pass between two fingers while Nicole looked at him like he had tracked dirt onto polished marble. Horizon Atlantic Flight 728 to Los Angeles had been boarding for less than 4 minutes, but suddenly the entire gate area felt charged, like static before a thunderstorm. Nicole folded her arms tighter across her navy blue uniform and tilted her head with a smile that wasn't really a smile. "Sir, first class is for premium passengers." A few people nearby exchanged uncomfortable looks. A businessman in a gray tailored suit chuckled under his breath and muttered, "Coach is in the back, buddy." His wife laughed softly beside him without even trying to hide it. Marcus glanced once toward the gate scanner, then back at Nicole. Calm. Steady. The kind of calm that made angry people even angrier. "That boarding pass scanned green," he said quietly. Nicole didn't even look at the screen. Then the system made a mistake. "Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe." These stories spark change, and we're glad you're here. Now, back to Marcus Ellison. Nicole stepped closer and lowered her voice just enough to sound cruel instead of loud. "People can fake almost anything these days." Then she ripped the boarding pass straight down the middle. The sound was soft, but inside the silent gate area, it landed like glass breaking. A little boy sitting near the charging station looked up at his mother and whispered, "Why is she yelling at him?" Nobody answered him. Marcus stared at the torn pieces in Nicole's hand. He didn't blink, didn't raise his voice, didn't argue. That was the strange part. Most people expected anger, defensiveness, embarrassment. But Marcus only slipped his phone from his pocket and checked the time. 6:11 p.m., 12 minutes before scheduled departure. Nicole mistook the silence for surrender. "You need to step aside before security gets involved." Around them, phones slowly started rising. Not aggressively, carefully, quietly. A college student near the terminal windows angled her camera toward the gate. An older black veteran seated beside the CNN monitor narrowed his eyes and muttered, "Here we go again." Marcus finally looked around the gate area. Not nervous, not intimidated, almost disappointed. Like he had seen this exact moment before in 100 different places with different uniforms and different faces. Then his eyes settled back on Nicole. "You still have time to stop this," he said. Nicole laughed once through her nose. "And you still have time to walk away before this gets embarrassing." Marcus looked past her toward the jet bridge entrance where the polished silver body of the aircraft waited outside beneath the floodlights. Massive, silent, expensive. Then he spoke so calmly that several people leaned forward just to hear him. "The embarrassing part," he said softly, "hasn't started yet." For a moment, nobody moved. The gate monitors continued flashing boarding groups above the crowd while rain streaked across the giant terminal windows outside, turning the runway lights into blurred lines of gold and white. Nicole Barrett held the torn boarding pass like proof of something she had already decided long before Marcus Ellison ever walked into gate B12. "Last chance," she said coldly. "Either step aside or you will not be flying tonight." Marcus slipped his phone back into his pocket and looked toward the aircraft again. Horizon Atlantic Flight 728 sat connected to the jet bridge beneath the evening storm, its silver body glowing under airport floodlights. Calm, untouched, waiting. He had spent most of his adult life around airplanes like that one. 23 years earlier, he had stood on a scorching tarmac in Dallas as a baggage handler making $12 an hour, watching executives walk past him without ever making eye contact. Back then, people noticed uniforms before they noticed humanity. Marcus learned that lesson young. What nobody at Gate B12 knew was that the quiet man standing in front of Nicole Barrett now controlled enough aviation contracts to stop half the departures on the East Coast with a single phone call. But he did not wear success the way they expected. No tailored suit, no luxury watch, no security detail, just a black hoodie and steady eyes that seemed almost tired of proving themselves to strangers. A woman near the gate podium lowered her phone slightly and whispered to her husband, "He is too calm." The husband nodded once. That is what scares her. Nicole heard it and stiffened immediately. "Sir, move away from the boarding lane." Marcus finally stepped aside without argument, but instead of leaving, he sat down directly across from the gate counter beneath the departure screen. Quietly, deliberately, like a man settling into the front row of a show he already knew the ending to. The businessman who had mocked him earlier laughed under his breath. Guess reality finally hit. Marcus ignored him. He opened his phone again and typed a single message. Protocol altitude standby. Send confirmation only. 3 dots appeared almost instantly. Then came the response from Rachel Monroe, his executive assistant. Already monitoring. Board members are online. Marcus locked the phone and rested it beside him. Nicole watched him carefully now. Something about his calm refusal to collapse under humiliation unsettled her more than anger would have. People who truly had nothing usually begged by now. Argued. Explained themselves. Marcus did none of that. The boarding line kept moving around him. Families rolled luggage past. Flight attendants crossed the jet bridge carrying tablets and coffee cups. But the energy around Gate B12 had changed. It no longer felt like ordinary travel tension. It felt personal. Heavy. Charged. A teenage airport employee pushing a wheelchair slowed near Marcus and quietly said, "Sir, I saw your pass scan green." Marcus looked up at him with the faintest smile. "I know. You did." Then the cockpit door at the end of the jet bridge opened. Captain Daniel Mercer emerged in full uniform, silver stripes sharp against his dark navy sleeves. Nicole immediately straightened with visible relief. She leaned toward him and pointed directly at Marcus like she had been waiting for backup. Daniel listened for less than 10 seconds before turning his cold attention toward the seated man beneath the departure screen. Then he started walking straight toward him. Captain Daniel Mercer walked with the kind of authority people usually obeyed before he even spoke. His polished shoes cut across the terminal floor in slow measured steps, while passengers instinctively moved aside for him. Tall, silver-haired, perfect posture, the image of control. By the time he reached Marcus Ellison, the entire boarding lane had nearly stopped moving. Nicole Barrett folded her arms with satisfaction beside him. "That is him," she said quickly. "Fake boarding pass. Refusing to leave the gate area." Daniel looked Marcus over once from head to toe. Hoodie, jeans, sneakers. His expression barely changed, but something colder settled into his eyes immediately. "Sir," he said flatly, "I need you to leave this boarding zone now." Marcus stayed seated beneath the glowing departure monitor. Why? It was not a challenge. Just one quiet word. Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. "Because this situation is disrupting my crew and delaying boarding." Marcus glanced toward the passengers, now openly watching from every direction. "Your crew created the disruption." Nicole stepped forward before Daniel could answer. "Captain, I watched him try to force his way into first class with fraudulent credentials." A few passengers frowned at that. The teenage airport worker near the gate whispered under his breath, "That is not what happened." But Nicole kept going. He became confrontational when questioned. Marcus looked at her for the first time since Daniel arrived. Confrontational. He almost sounded amused by the word. Daniel folded his hands behind his back like a judge delivering a final ruling. "This is your last opportunity to leave voluntarily before airport security becomes involved." The businessman in the gray suit smirked openly now. About time. But several phones were still recording. More than before. A woman near the charging station quietly said into her camera, "They are really trying to remove him over his seat." Marcus slowly stood. Not aggressively. Calmly. The gate area seemed to tense all at once anyway. Daniel immediately squared his shoulders as if preparing for resistance that never came. Marcus looked directly at him. "Did you personally verify the boarding records before accusing me of fraud?" Daniel hesitated half a second. "My crew already handled verification." "No," Marcus replied softly. "They handled assumption." Silence spread through the gate like smoke. Nicole's face hardened instantly. "Captain, he is trying to manipulate the situation." Marcus ignored her completely. Around them, boarding had nearly stopped altogether now. Passengers stood frozen halfway through the line, watching the confrontation unfold beneath the bright white gate lights. Then another voice entered the moment. "Captain Mercer?" Everyone turned. A young flight attendant with a loose blonde ponytail stepped carefully out from the jet bridge entrance holding a crew tablet against her chest. Ava Brooks looked nervous before she even spoke again. I think there may be a mistake with the manifest. Nicole snapped toward her immediately. Ava, not now. But Ava swallowed hard and continued anyway. I remember seeing his name assigned to Seat 2 Alpha during pre-boarding checks. Nicole's expression darkened so fast several passengers noticed it instantly. You are new, she said sharply. So maybe you should stop talking before you confuse yourself. Ava looked down at the tablet in her hands. Her fingers tightened around it. Marcus watched the exchange silently. Daniel extended his hand toward Ava. Give me the device. She hesitated. Just long enough for Marcus to notice. Just long enough for the crowd to notice too. Then Nicole moved beside Ava and grabbed the tablet herself. Fast. Controlled. Her fingers moved across the screen for barely 2 seconds before she locked it again. But Ava saw it. Marcus saw her see it. The color drained slightly from Ava's face as Nicole handed the tablet to Daniel with forced confidence. No passenger by that name is listed in first class, she announced loudly. Ava stared at the dark screen in silence. Because 30 seconds earlier, she knew for a fact that Marcus Ellison's name had been right there. Ava Brooks could feel her heartbeat in her throat as the gate area sank deeper into silence. Nicole Barrett stood beside Captain Mercer with the confidence of someone who believed authority alone could erase reality. But Ava knew what she had seen. Marcus Ellison's name had been sitting clearly on the first-class manifest less than a minute earlier beside Seat 2 Alpha with a gold executive clearance marker attached to it. She had checked the boarding list twice because the tag itself was unusual. Owner priority status. She remembered thinking it sounded important. Now suddenly the name was gone. Like it had never existed. Daniel Mercer handed the tablet back toward Nicole without another glance. There is no record of this passenger in first class, he announced firmly to the crowd. Nicole nodded immediately. Exactly what I told you. But the tension around the gate shifted strangely after that. People were no longer watching Marcus with suspicion. They were watching the crew. Marcus stood perfectly still beneath the departure screen while rain hammered softly against the terminal windows behind him. Calm. Silent. Untouched by the panic beginning to spread around everyone else. Ava looked at Marcus again and noticed something unsettling. He did not look surprised. He looked disappointed. Like this was confirming something he already feared about his own airline. The businessman in the gray suit stepped closer to the boarding lane and laughed quietly. This is getting pathetic. His wife folded her scarf tighter around her neck. Honestly, why does he keep standing there? Marcus answered before anyone else could. Because leaving would make your version of the story true. Several passengers exchanged looks after that. A woman holding a carry-on near the gate scanner slowly lowered her phone and whispered. That did not sound like a scammer. Nicole's jaw tightened immediately. Sir, enough speeches. You are delaying boarding for almost 200 passengers. Marcus glanced up toward the gate monitor, flashing final call in bright red letters. No, he said quietly. Your decisions are delaying boarding. Ava swallowed hard. She knew she should stay quiet. Training taught new crew members never to challenge senior staff publicly, especially pilots, especially during boarding. But every second this continued felt heavier than the last. Then she noticed Nicole's tablet screen light briefly in her hand. One notification flashed across it before disappearing again. Passenger record modified. Ava's stomach dropped. Daniel stepped closer toward Marcus now. You are creating a security concern inside this terminal. Marcus tilted his head slightly. By standing quietly with a valid ticket. By refusing crew instruction. Marcus nodded slowly like he was collecting every word. Around them more phones appeared. An older black woman seated beside the charging station spoke loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. Funny how calm black men suddenly become threats when they stop apologizing. The businessman scoffed at her immediately. Oh, here we go? Everything becomes racism now. Marcus finally looked toward him. No, he said calmly. Just the familiar parts. Silence hit again. Sharp this time. Uncomfortable. Ava felt it move through the crowd like cold air. Then Nicole turned suddenly toward airport security, posted near the neighboring gate, and raised her hand. We need assistance over here. 2 security officers immediately started walking toward gate B12. The atmosphere changed instantly. Conversations stopped completely now. Passengers pulled children closer. Phones rose higher. Marcus watched the officers approach without moving an inch. Daniel Mercer folded his arms with visible satisfaction, while Nicole stepped back beside him like the outcome had already been decided. But Ava could not shake the feeling growing in her chest. Something about this entire moment felt backwards. Wrong. And when she looked at Marcus Ellison again beneath the white terminal lights, she realized he was no longer watching the crew at all. He was watching the clock. The two airport security officers approached Gate B12 with the careful confidence of men used to ending situations quickly. One was tall with broad shoulders and a shaved head. The other younger, quieter, his radio crackling softly against his jacket as he scanned the crowd gathering around the boarding lane. Nicole Barrett immediately stepped toward them before either officer could speak. This passenger presented fraudulent credentials and is refusing to leave the gate area, she announced loudly enough for half the terminal to hear. Marcus Ellison remained standing beneath the departure monitor without moving an inch. Calm. Still. The younger officer glanced toward Marcus, then toward the dozens of raised phones pointed at the scene. He looked uncertain already. Sir, the taller officer began carefully. Can we see identification? Marcus reached slowly into his pocket and handed over his driver's license without resistance. The officer studied it for several seconds. Marcus Ellison, Chicago, Illinois. Everything valid. Everything normal. Nicole crossed her arms tighter. Fake identification exists too. Several passengers groaned quietly at that. The older black woman near the charging station shook her head in disbelief. Nothing will ever be enough for people like her. Daniel Mercer stepped beside Nicole again, his pilot uniform glowing beneath the terminal lights like borrowed authority. Officers, this man has delayed departure and created disruption with my crew. Marcus finally spoke. Interesting choice of words. Daniel stared at him coldly. Facts are not choices. Marcus looked toward the aircraft outside the rain-covered windows. Neither are patterns. The taller officer handed Marcus his identification back slowly. Sir, if you are not listed on the active manifest, we may need you to leave the secured boarding area while this gets sorted out. Marcus accepted the license calmly. Then the younger officer quietly asked the question nobody else had asked yet. Did his boarding pass actually scan at the gate? Silence. Brief. Sharp. Nicole answered too fast. The system glitched. Ava Brooks lowered her eyes immediately, because she knew that was a lie. Marcus noticed it too. He watched Ava carefully as she stood frozen near the jet bridge entrance, clutching her tablet against her chest like it suddenly weighed 50 pounds. Then the taller officer stepped slightly closer to Marcus and lowered his voice. Sir, we are trying to avoid escalation here. The moment the word escalation left his mouth, Marcus seemed to disappear somewhere inside himself for half a second. His eyes drifted toward the runway lights beyond the terminal glass as memory surfaced like old smoke. 19 years old. Regional airport outside Atlanta. Cheap gray jacket. Rain hitting concrete so hard it sounded like static. Security standing over him while strangers watched from plastic seats near gate C9. One employee had pointed at him and whispered the exact same word. Escalation. Marcus remembered the humiliation more than the anger. The feeling of becoming dangerous in people's eyes simply because he refused to disappear quietly. That night he had walked 3 miles through cold rain after missing the only flight home. No apology ever came. No accountability either. Just silence. The memory vanished as quickly as it arrived. Marcus looked back at the officer standing in front of him now. Calm returned instantly to his face. You should be careful, he said quietly. About what? The officer asked. Marcus glanced toward Daniel Mercer and Nicole Barrett before answering. About helping the wrong people tell the wrong story. The younger officer shifted uneasily after hearing that. Around them the gate area had become almost completely still now. Passengers were no longer pretending to ignore what was happening. Even airline staff from neighboring gates had started watching from a distance. Nicole sensed the mood changing and immediately pointed toward the terminal exit. Enough talking. Remove him so we can close boarding. But before either officer responded, a soft chime sounded from Marcus Ellison's phone. He looked down at the screen once. Rachel Monroe had sent only 3 words. Protocol altitude active. The atmosphere inside gate B12 changed the second Marcus Ellison lowered his phone back into his pocket. Nothing dramatic happened at first. No alarms. No shouting. Just a strange pause that seemed to spread quietly through the terminal like invisible pressure. Outside, the rain continued washing over the runway lights, while Flight 728 sat motionless beneath the storm. Then one of the gate agents behind the counter frowned at her screen. "That is weird," she muttered softly. Nicole Barrett turned immediately. "What now?" The agent blinked twice at the monitor. "The aircraft just lost pushback authorization." Daniel Mercer stiffened beside her. "What do you mean lost authorization?" The gate agent refreshed the screen again. "Operations just placed the departure on temporary hold." A ripple moved through the crowd. Passengers started checking their phones. Boarding had stopped completely now. The jet bridge door remained open, but nobody else was moving onto the aircraft. Daniel stepped toward the counter sharply. "Get operations on the line immediately." Marcus stood silently near the boarding lane with his hands resting loosely inside the pockets of his hoodie. "Calm. Watching." Nicole pointed at him instantly. "This is because of him." Marcus tilted his head slightly. "Interesting assumption." Daniel grabbed the gate phone and spoke with the controlled irritation of a man unaccustomed to hearing the word no. "This is Captain Mercer on Flight 728. Why has departure clearance been paused?" Silence followed while everyone watched his face slowly change. Confusion first, then tension, then something closer to concern. "What do you mean executive review?" he asked quietly. Several passengers exchanged looks immediately after hearing that phrase. Ava Brooks stood frozen near the jet bridge entrance, her heart pounding harder now, because suddenly the pieces were beginning to fit together in her mind. The owner clearance tag, the calmness, the lack of fear. Marcus looked toward the giant terminal windows as lightning flickered faintly behind the clouds over the runway. "Funny thing about systems," he said softly. "People think they only notice power when it is loud." Nicole snapped toward him. "Stop acting like you have anything to do with this." Marcus met her eyes evenly. "I do." Daniel lowered the phone slowly from his ear. "Fuel clearance has been suspended pending corporate authorization." The businessman in the gray suit laughed nervously. "What does that even mean?" But nobody answered him, because the gate agents behind the counter were now whispering urgently among themselves while refreshing screens over and over again. One of them looked visibly pale. "Captain," she said carefully, "there is also a lock on the passenger manifest." Daniel stared at her. "By who?" She swallowed hard before answering. "Executive operations." Silence hit harder this time. The younger security officer looked at Marcus differently now. No longer suspicious. Curious. Uneasy. Nicole folded her arms tighter, as if confidence alone could stop the room from turning against her. "This is ridiculous. He is bluffing." Marcus glanced at the departure clock overhead. 6:19 p.m. 4 minutes before scheduled pushback. Then his phone rang. Rachel Monroe. Marcus answered calmly and placed the call on speaker. Her voice came through sharp and professional over the stunned silence of Gate B12. Protocol altitude fully active. Internal flight logs secured. Crew communication recordings archived. Executive board now monitoring the situation live. Nobody moved. Rachel continued. Ground operations has frozen Flight 728 pending direct review from Horizon Atlantic ownership. Daniel Mercer's face drained of color. Nicole looked suddenly smaller standing beside him beneath the harsh terminal lights. Marcus listened quietly before asking one question. "Has the cockpit been notified yet?" Rachel answered immediately. "Yes. They know now that the aircraft cannot move without your authorization." Several passengers gasped softly at once. The businessman in the gray suit stared at Marcus like he was seeing him clearly for the first time. Ava Brooks felt chills move down her arms. Because in that moment, she finally understood something terrifying for everyone standing there. The quiet man in the black hoodie had never been trapped at Gate B12 with them. They were trapped there with him. Gate B12 had gone completely silent except for the rain, striking the windows and the distant hum of grounded aircraft outside. Nobody was boarding anymore. Nobody was leaving either. Nearly every passenger in the terminal now faced the same direction toward Marcus Ellison standing calmly beneath the departure screen, while Horizon Atlantic Flight 728 remained frozen at the gate behind him. Daniel Mercer looked like a man trying to hold water in his hands. Control kept slipping through his fingers no matter how tightly he reached for it. "Who exactly are you?" he asked finally. Marcus studied him for a moment before answering. "You never asked that question when you thought I was powerless." Nicole Barrett stepped forward immediately, desperate to regain the room. "This is insane." He manipulated operations somehow. Rachel Monroe's voice still echoed faintly from the phone speaker in Marcus's hand. Executive board now monitoring the situation live. The younger security officer slowly stepped backward away from Marcus, instinctively creating distance from the disaster unfolding around them. Ava Brooks stood near the jet bridge entrance, clutching her crew tablet so tightly her knuckles had turned pale white. She could feel the entire atmosphere changing by the second. People were no longer looking at Marcus like a removed passenger. They were looking at him like the center of gravity itself. Marcus glanced toward the massive aircraft outside the windows. Rainwater slid across the silver body beneath flashing runway lights, while fuel trucks sat motionless nearby, waiting for authorization that was never coming. Then his phone rang again. This time the caller identification made Daniel Mercer's face visibly tighten. Horizon Atlantic Executive Board. Marcus answered calmly and pressed speaker once more. A sharp professional voice filled the stunned gate area instantly. Captain Mercer, this is Eleanor Whitmore from Executive Operations. Daniel straightened automatically. Yes, ma'am. We need clarification immediately. Eleanor continued coldly. Why has executive stakeholder Marcus Ellison been denied boarding access to his assigned first-class seat? The words hit the terminal like an explosion without noise. Several passengers gasped openly. Someone near the charging station whispered, "Oh my God." The businessman in the gray suit suddenly looked sick. Nicole Barrett blinked rapidly as if her mind could not process what she had just heard. Daniel Mercer's mouth opened slightly before closing again. Marcus remained completely still while the truth settled over the crowd. Eleanor continued. Mr. Ellison currently holds controlling executive authority over all East Coast operational partnerships connected to Horizon Atlantic. Ava felt chills rush down her spine. Because suddenly every strange detail made perfect sense. The owner clearance tag, the operations freeze, the manifest lock, the confidence. Marcus finally looked directly at Daniel Mercer. You removed the owner from his own aircraft. Nobody moved. Nobody even breathed loudly. Nicole shook her head quickly. No, there has to be some mistake. Marcus reached calmly into his pocket and removed a slim black credential card. No gold decoration. No dramatic flourish. Just his name engraved across the surface beneath the Horizon Atlantic executive insignia. Marcus Ellison, executive stakeholder. Daniel stared at it like it might burn him. You accused me of fraud, Marcus said quietly. You erased my seat assignment. You delayed your own flight, trying to prove a black man could not possibly belong in first class unless he was pretending. Nicole's face drained completely of color. Around them, phones captured every second now. Passengers whispered frantically to each other, while the older black woman near the charging station slowly smiled through tears in her eyes. Ava looked toward Marcus with something close to disbelief. He had never raised his voice once, never threatened anyone, never lost control. Yet somehow the entire airline had stopped moving around him. Eleanor Whitmore spoke again through the speakerphone, colder now than before. Captain Mercer, Nicole Barrett, remain exactly where you are. Internal review has already begun. Marcus slipped the black credential card back into his pocket slowly. Then he looked around gate B12 at the faces staring back at him. The problem was never that you did not know who I was, he said softly. The problem was how comfortable you became after deciding who you thought I could not be. The collapse started quietly. That was the part nobody expected. No screaming. No dramatic scene. Just systems shutting doors one by one while the truth spread through gate B12 faster than anyone could control it. Daniel Mercer stood frozen beside the boarding lane with the executive call still echoing faintly through Marcus Ellison's phone speaker. Nicole Barrett looked around the terminal like she was searching for someone to wake her from a nightmare that had arrived too fast. Passengers no longer whispered now. They stared openly. Phones remained raised from every angle, capturing the exact moment power shifted inside Horizon Atlantic's terminal. Then the first sound came. Beep. Nicole looked down instantly at the electronic crew badge clipped to her uniform. The blue access light had turned red. Her face lost what little confidence remained. What is happening? She asked quietly. Another sound answered her. Beep. Daniel Mercer checked his own pilot credentials. Red. Access suspended. The gate agents behind the counter stepped backward instinctively as system alerts began flashing across every terminal monitor connected to Flight 728. Executive review active. Crew authorization revoked. Do not depart aircraft. Ava Brooks stared at the screens in disbelief. Around her, the entire atmosphere inside Gate B12 had transformed. 20 minutes earlier, Marcus Ellison had been treated like someone who did not belong near first class. Now the aircraft itself could not legally move without his approval. Eleanor Whitmore's voice returned through the speakerphone sharper than before. Captain Mercer, you are officially suspended pending investigation into passenger discrimination, manifest tampering, and violation of Horizon Atlantic conduct policy. Daniel swallowed visibly. Ma'am, there has been a misunderstanding. Marcus looked at him calmly. No, there has been a reveal. The older black woman near the charging station smiled slowly and whispered, about time. Nicole stepped toward Marcus with panic finally breaking through her voice. Please, listen, we did not know who you were. Marcus met her eyes evenly. Exactly. Silence crushed the gate again. Because everyone understood what he meant now. Nicole had shown him no dignity before status entered the conversation. None. Daniel tried again desperately. Mr. Ellison, perhaps we should continue this privately. Marcus shook his head once. You humiliated me publicly. The businessman in the gray suit lowered his eyes immediately after hearing that. His wife quietly stepped farther away from him. Nearby passengers continued recording while social media notifications exploded across screens throughout the gate area. Someone muttered, "This is going viral already." Ava noticed the younger security officer slowly removing himself from beside Daniel Mercer, as if instinct told him to create distance from failure before it spread. The taller officer adjusted his posture immediately toward Marcus. Respectful now. Careful. Different. Marcus noticed that too. Amazing how professionalism appears after power gets confirmed, he said softly. Nobody answered him. Rachel Monroe's voice entered through the phone again. Marcus, legal has completed review of the manifest history. Marcus glanced down at the screen. And? Rachel paused only a second. Nicole Barrett manually removed your name from first-class access at 6:13 p.m. A collective gasp moved through the crowd. Ava closed her eyes briefly because she already knew it was true. Daniel Mercer looked toward Nicole slowly like he no longer recognized the situation standing beside him. Nicole's lips trembled slightly. I thought, she started. Marcus interrupted gently. You thought a black man in a hoodie could not possibly belong there. The rain outside intensified against the windows, while Flight 728 remained dark and motionless beyond the glass. Grounded. Silent. Exposed. Eleanor Whitmore spoke one final time through the speakerphone. Nicole Barrett, your employment with Horizon Atlantic is terminated effective immediately. Another beep echoed through the gate as Nicole's badge fully deactivated in her hand. Then came Daniel Mercer's turn. Captain Mercer, your pilot authority is suspended pending full board review. Daniel lowered his eyes for the first time since this began. Marcus watched both of them quietly beneath the departure monitor while passengers recorded every second. Then he spoke one final sentence into the silence hanging over Gate B12. You were so determined to remove the wrong passenger that you never noticed you were removing yourselves. Rain continued falling over JFK long after the shouting had ended at Gate B12. The storm outside seemed quieter now somehow, as if even the runway itself had settled into silence after watching the entire terminal shift around one man who never once raised his voice. Horizon Atlantic Flight 728 remained parked beneath the floodlights with its jet bridge still attached and its departure status flashing delayed across every nearby monitor. Nobody complained anymore. Not after what they had just witnessed. Marcus Ellison stood near the terminal windows with both hands resting loosely inside the pockets of his black hoodie, while airport staff moved carefully around him with a level of respect that had not existed 20 minutes earlier. The difference was impossible to ignore. The younger security officer approached first. Mr. Ellison, he said quietly, I want to apologize for how this situation was handled. Marcus looked at him calmly. You asked questions before making assumptions. That matters. The officer nodded once and stepped away silently. Nearby passengers continued whispering while videos from the gate exploded across social media faster than Horizon Atlantic's public relations team could possibly contain. A teenager holding her phone near the charging station stared at the screen in disbelief. 3 million views already, she whispered. The businessman in the gray suit who had mocked Marcus earlier stood near the coffee stand with his eyes fixed on the floor. His wife finally spoke the words he could not. We should have said something sooner. Marcus heard her. He turned slightly toward them. Most people wait until power enters the room before they find their courage. Neither of them answered. Ava Brooks slowly walked over from the jet bridge entrance, still holding the same crew tablet that had started unraveling the lie almost an hour earlier. She looked nervous again, but for a different reason now. Mr. Ellison, she said softly, I am sorry I did not speak up sooner. Marcus studied her for a moment beneath the bright terminal lights. You spoke when it became difficult, he replied. That is when it counts. Ava's eyes watered instantly. Around them, airport employees moved quietly, removing Daniel Mercer and Nicole Barrett's access from active systems, while replacement crew prepared the aircraft for reassignment. No shouting, no spectacle, just consequences arriving piece by piece like doors closing forever. Marcus glanced once more through the rain-streaked windows toward the grounded aircraft sitting motionless on the runway edge. Massive, silent, powerless without permission. The same plane he had been told he did not belong on less than an hour earlier. Rachel Monroe's voice came softly through his phone again. The board wants a formal statement before morning. Marcus smiled faintly. They already have one. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and started walking slowly toward the terminal exit. Passengers moved aside instinctively as he passed. Not because he demanded space, but because dignity carries its own gravity once people finally recognize it. The older black woman near the charging station touched her chest lightly as Marcus walked by. Thank you, she whispered. Marcus paused only briefly before answering. Do not thank me for expecting respect. Then he continued toward the sliding glass doors at the far end of the terminal while cameras followed him through the crowd. Outside, flashing runway lights reflected across the wet pavement beneath the storm clouds hanging over New York City. Marcus stopped just before stepping into the rain and looked back once toward Gate B12, where everything had started with a single sentence about where he supposedly did not belong. His expression never changed. Calm, steady, certain. They saw a black man in a hoodie, he said quietly. So they created a story about who they thought he had to be. The terminal behind him remained completely silent. Marcus opened the glass door and cold, rain-filled air rushed inside around him. Then came the final words. I did not raise my voice tonight. I raised the standard.